Hello, this is Darrell Castle with today's Castle Report. This is Friday, the 6th day of February in the year of our Lord 2026. Although I'm a little late to the party, I will be talking about what is going on in Minneapolis as well as the state of Minnesota. What in the world is going on there? Does anyone care about the violence, the death? And what about the fraud? Was a 37-year-old ICU nurse really a threat to the ICE agents in Minnesota? Do Americans who film such agents as they try to do their jobs belong on government lists? Should the presence of ICE agents in Minnesota be eliminated since the politicians and the people apparently are violently opposed to their presence? The answers to these questions, unfortunately, almost always depend on one's political party affiliation. Republicans back ICE and its deportation efforts, while Democrats stand with Alex Pretti. Sometimes these positions require members of both parties to abandon the principles they once held dear. The struggle this time around has often centered on the real culprit, the ruling class. Everything seems like a diversion or a distraction. When you see the Minnesota politicians parading around talking about the demonization of the Somali community, one might wonder if they are just trying to distract attention away from the billions in fraud from which they allegedly received hefty amounts. When the administration doubles down on its hardline response by sending in more and more agents, even after people have been killed, one wonders if this is in reality an effort to distract us from the coming stupid, pointless war against Iran. Yes, the U.S. sent another carrier battle group into the Persian Gulf as an obvious threat to attack at the moment of Trump or Netanyahu's choosing. Yes, Bibi. Bibi has or soon will be coming to America for the sixth time in the Trump presidency, perhaps to deliver the president his strike options for the coming attack on Iran. A diversion for our attention is therefore a welcome side benefit thanks to the violence of the protesters in Minneapolis. I can't help but wonder why the president has made no effort to explain to the American people why an attack on Iran is in their best interest. He seems to go from one reason to another. As one justification is erased, another takes its place. For example, he first gave us the nuclear threat or weapons of mass destruction story we have heard so many times before. Then we are told the nuclear enrichment sites were, quote, obliterated in a previous American attack. Then CIA, Mossad, who knows how many others, allegedly launched a violent protest movement directed at regime change in Iran. When the Iranian regime put down the uprising with extreme violence, that became another excuse for the attack. The sides are now talking about a way to avoid war, but I get the impression it's simply a brief delay for some reason or another. A similar delay is going on in Minnesota as the sides are talking, and Mr. Homan has agreed to withdraw 700 agents. Could the agreement be this? Look, Governor Walz, if you will stop inciting this violence and let us at least arrest the murderers and rapists among you, then you can keep the millions you stole from the American people. I don't know if that's true, folks, but it sounds a little plausible to me. What about the fraud? Let's talk about that for a moment. The fraud conducted by the, quote, Somali community, escorted into this country by Barack Hussein Obama and Joe Biden, and grouped together in Minnesota so they could have political power and even elect their own members to Congress to lecture us about racism. We are expected to concentrate on the seeming insanity of the ICE protesters and ICE agents instead of the money and where it goes. The last figures I've seen reveal that Somali welfare fraud in Minnesota is estimated at $9 billion. That's $9 billion of Medicaid and other welfare stolen from people who work, from people who need the help, and shuffled off to various fraudulent enterprises run by the Somali community. This is just the amount found to have been stolen in Minnesota. Is predicted to be even worse in California, Illinois, Maine, New York, perhaps other Democrat states. Who knows how many billions of dollars of your labor have been stolen? Well, Elon Musk says he knows the various forms of fraudulent payments given away by the federal government amount to 1.5 and $2 trillion per year, which is about 25% of actual government spending, which coincides almost exactly with the deficit. In other words, if these figures are correct, that $2 trillion the government spends over what it takes in each year is all fraud. Almost all this fraud goes to perpetuate various deep state programs and to line the pockets of Democrat voters and especially their politicians. That's why they fight so hard to make us ignore it and to detract us from investigating it. Now let me say a few words about the killing of Alex Pretti by ICE agents in Minneapolis. Mr. Pretti apparently was killed when the agents first disarmed him of his legally possessed handgun, then threw him to the ground, shot him in the back several times. The object was waving in his hand. Apparently that was a cell phone. And to say they thought it was a gun made no sense because he had been disarmed. It does remind one a little of the bad old days of Democrat presidents when conservatives feared the feds more than supporting them. I'm thinking specifically of the incident in which Vicki Weaver had her head blown off by an FBI sniper named Lon Horiuchi while she stood in her cabin door holding her child in her arms. Agents also killed the Weaver's 14-year-old son by shooting him in the back. I knew Randy Weaver quite well back then, as we had met at many speaking engagements, and he was often at gun shows where I campaigned for office. The government today says there's no comparison with Vicki and Alex Pretti because she was unarmed. The truth is that Vicki had a .380 caliber handgun in a holster under her dress, just as Pretti had a legal gun in his possession. Once again, they, the ruling elite that is, distract us from the real enemy. I've seen and heard Mr. Pretti described as a beloved ICU nurse and a peaceful man. I've no argument with the beloved description, since I have no evidence to dispute that. But the peaceful part I definitely dispute. To me, he appeared to be a man so fanatical in his system of beliefs, he was out of control and violently so. He was a nurse, which is a profession of the most noble among all, if it is practiced correctly. Who can't tell stories of heroic nurses sitting with the dying or helping one through some of the most trying moments of life? Well, there was another nurse, a nurse whose name goes unmentioned, but not by me. I say her name. I hope her parents are not offended by that, but I feel compelled to speak for her because she really was peaceful. Her name was Laken Riley. She was peacefully jogging on her Georgia college campus when she was assaulted, raped, and murdered by an illegal criminal invited into this country by Joe Biden. Why, I ask? Why do none of the protesters care about Laken? She goes unmentioned by Democrat politicians and their protesters, I suppose, because she just doesn't fit their political agenda. Laken's benevolence, her altruistic pursuits, her many accomplishments, her hopes and dreams count for nothing because she did not meet the Democrat politicians' definition of someone they should care about. Sadly, Laken went out for a jog one day, but she didn't come back. The same fate has happened to literally dozens of other women and girls at the hands of criminals whose cages were opened by Joe Biden. Just to name a few: Sarah Root, Rachel Moran, Jocelyn Nungare, but they have been countless others. Jocelyn is of particular importance to me, but I don't say much about her because she was a 12-year-old child when she was very brutally murdered by 5 of Joe Biden's criminal invaders. No one speaks for her. I suppose she's an embarrassment to the entire spectrum of what the ruling elite are trying to accomplish in this country and this world. That's probably enough about the women who have been murdered. But there's one more, just one more. Very recently in Illinois, recently a man named Joe Abraham has gained national attention because he has had the audacity to speak for his 20-year-old daughter, Katie, Killed while stopped at a traffic light by a drunk driver. An illegal named Julio Cucal Bull, Mr. Bull, fled the scene, but Katie was killed instantly. At least she didn't have to endure the torture that Jocelyn did. This case reminds me of that most appealing argument the Democrats make, and that is, if we deport criminals, we would be forced separation of families. Well, the Abraham, Riley, and Nogueira families, among countless others, were certainly separated. None of these women are ever spoken of by Democrats. There have been no protests, no demonstrations objecting to the government's policy of inviting violent criminals to walk among us. I suggest that when we see and hear the violent protests about ICE, we try to remember the real victims who, for Democrat politicians and their supporters, remain nameless, but for their families, the loss is never ending. In conclusion, folks, I want to conclude this Castle report by recommending to you a book that was just released, in which I had to get an early copy of to read. Peter Schweitzer, he's the author. Peter Schweitzer, the book, The Invisible Coup, How American Elites and Foreign Powers Use Migration as a Weapon. That's the name of the book. The book opens for you the war that has been prosecuted against us by people who hate us and intend to destroy us, and unfortunately, that often includes our leaders. Finally, folks, what in the world does all this mean? What's going on here? Well, that's a topic for another day, perhaps next week. We'll see. Remember the nameless, remember the fallen ones. Pray for peace, folks, here and abroad. At least that's the way I see it. Till next time, this is Darrell Castle. Thanks for listening.